Well, hello everyone. This is John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this live broadcast, thanks to your generosity and recording, is to give us to enjoy day 263 of the project. This is Apocatastasis unified curriculum as I'm fighting with the different bubbles. There we go. The French Revolution begins. That's where we're at today. And the project has its own sub website, so you can get access to the text we're using freely, as well as the poetry, which complements our study. Our weekly curses of poetry will soon grow to a monthly cursus, and then we'll be expanding the readings all in a contained cyclical reading, which will really help us brush up on our knowledge of the Western humanities, which simply is our culture. And that's what we specialize in here at the Institute. One announcement concerning Apocatastasis I'll bring on the screen, and that is our summer cursive handwriting program. You can see I'm holding up an old dip pen to inspire us throughout our class. This will be my pointer for today. But yes, Miss Vandana Rotaria, whom you know as our math wizard here at Apocatastasis, along with Professor Adam Myers. I should say they're both pros in math, but Vandana is a pro in cursive handwriting all by herself. And so here on the screen, we can see her EJ classes subsite, and you can see different interviews we've done. But for today's advertisement, I bring your attention indeed to our cursive handwriting collaboration. And Vandana and I talked for an hour. I did not expect our talk to really go beyond 20 minutes, but there was a lot to get into with cursive handwriting. We talked for an hour, and you can see about her cursive handwriting course here. And I'm reminded that I need to update this with our summer program as well, because there's Vandana. And we will get that up because, yes, we will have a condensed cursive handwriting course for grade school students offered online this summer. So this is a great way, not just to make your handwriting pretty. That's a very superficial use of cursive, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a lot deeper considerations when it comes to cursive handwriting, not the least of which something we're very keen on here at the Institute. The letters in cursive are connected. There's a philosophy there. Just like we teach our subjects in tandem, literature and languages and philosophy and history, the same unity of knowledge is present in cursive. And it's those sorts of things, indeed, we got into in our chit chat the other day. So please consider that for your children this summer and going forward, our cursive offerings here at the Institute. All right. So we've looked at our advertisement. Now it's time for our poem. And I'll tell you, I have so many levers and so many things here that I'm learning to use. So you'll have to forgive me. I now want to have background music. I want to know, do you think the background music is distracting or is it encouraging? Um, so we will have Gandana no Uta. I will not put the Marseille on, the anthem of the French Revolution. I will not put that on. Um, it might certainly be too distracting. So let's just play around with that. Okay, I know the other day was a little bit louder. So, okay, so let me know if you like the background music or not. Tell me all the kids are using it. So, all right. But speaking of the Marseille, whilst we have Gandana nu Uta in the background, let's bring up the French Revolutionary song. And we'll enjoy this as a poem. Revolutions are good at producing cultural artifacts, and this is certainly one that's worth bringing up because it does encapsulate the whole mind of the revolution in toto. Of course, the French Revolution goes through various stages, as all revolutions must. And tomorrow we'll talk about the Jacobins and that extreme phase. But for today, things are very much in the mild or more go along to get along aspect of the French Revolution. And I'm going to bring up the lyrics here of the Marseillaise momentarily. And we'll go from there. And part of the project is the use of poetry and prose. So you can read about, in these tertiary artifacts like the outline of history, you can read about the events, but there is a whole other aspect of things when it comes to poetry. So here we go. This is indeed the French national anthem today. Their Independence Day is July 14th, the storming of the Bastille, as we'll see. All right, so it was composed in 1792, right before the radical phase really gets cracking. The anthem has a revolutionary tone, has been banned and reinstated several times in French history. The Marseillaise remains a significant cultural symbol and is often included in popular songs and films worldwide. I don't want to get to the lyrics. There we go. So, clunky English speakers that we are, we'll make do with the text on the right. Okay, let's go, children of the fatherland. The day of glory has arrived. Against us tyranny's bloody flag is raised. In the countryside, do you hear the roaring of these fierce soldiers? They come right to our arms to slit the throats of our sons, our friends. And the refrain, grab your weapons, citoyens, form your battalions. Let us march, may in pure blood water our fields. This horde of slaves, traitors, plotting kings, what do they want? For whom these vile shackles, these long prepared irons? Frenchmen, for us, oh, what an insult, what emotion that must excite. It is us they want to dare to consider, returning to ancient slavery. Chorus. What? These foreign troops would make their laws in our home? What? These mercenary phalanxes would bring down our proud warriors? Good Lord, be chained hands our brows would bend beneath the yoke. Vile despots would become the masters of our fate. Chorus. Tremble, tyrants, and you traitors, the disgrace of all groups, tremble, you parricidal plans, who will finally pay the price. Everyone is a soldier to fight you. If they fall, our young heroes, France will make more ready to battle you. Frenchmen, as magnanimous warriors, bear or hold back your blows. Spare these sad victims, regretfully aiming against us. But not these bloodthirsty despots, but not these accomplices of Buell. All of these animals who, without pity, tear their mother's breasts to pieces. Sacred love of France, lead, support our avenging arms. Liberty, beloved liberty, fight with your defenders under our flags. Let victory hasten to your manly tones. May your dying enemies see your triumph and our glory. We will enter the pit when our elders are no longer there. There we will find their dust and the traces of their virtues. Much less eager to outlive them than to share their casket, we will have the sublime pride of avenging them or following them. To autem Domine miserere nobis, Deo gratias. So thus is the Marseillaise, ultimately the anthem of France, on again, off again, depending on, well, when the Ancien Regime reasserts itself, which does happen any number of times in French history. Strangely enough, the French are not as nearly married to a continuity as the Americans are. it is not a stretch, or it is not conspiratorial to say that there are at least three different American governments that have existed, all of which pretended the same 18th century government of the U.S. Constitution. I'm not even getting into the Articles of Confederacy stuff. Americans can't bring themselves to admit that the experiment of the American Revolution ended in 1861. In fact, was it, I believe, March 20th, 1861. You can actually see in the congressional record when the Constitution stopped being in effect. And then from that until FDR, from Lincoln until FDR, you had another American regime, and then from FDR until now. Americans will they will not even know that's the case, much less will they know enough to deny it. And yet that is a historical fact. The French, to my point, don't seem to be so caught up on this, and they have gone, back and forth between one republic and the Ancien regime back, another republic and the Ancien regime back, another republic, and the German, and so forth. I think they're on their fifth or sixth republic right now. So that's an interesting thing to pick and to compare between these two initial liberal revolutions, the American and the French. And of course, it is interesting as well to consider things in these revolutions which are similar, such as the American Bill of Rights, insisted on by Thomas Jefferson, and then the rights of man and the citizen of the National Assembly, and very interesting differences and similarities there. But we get ahead of ourselves. So now, having our announcement under our belt, having the Marseille under our belt, and getting that Gallic blood boiling at the enemies of France, which would have been something of a new concept to a lot of Frenchmen, so-called. There's a great book. I assign it. I've assigned it for years. I don't think people have quite sucked the marrow out of it. Often students shortchange themselves. But the book is Victor Hugo's 93. In my opinion, the best work of Victor Hugo. Has all of the themes of Les Miserables without 100-page explanations of Waterloo and the sewer systems of France, infamously. It's very much, I wouldn't say condensed. It's like condensed like a diamond is condensed carbon. It has all of the same themes, but the story is much tighter. 93. And in this meditation of Victor Hugo himself, who was a Republican and having to come to terms with the crimes of the revolution, he gets into a lot of that, a lot of the drama there, and a lot of the factionalism. And in fact, speaking about how revolutions and wars and things can get out of control and can grind down and wind up and zig and zag, he has a great line in that to the effect of an insurgency begins by attacking a battalion and ends by robbing a stagecoach. And there is indeed a lot to that. And there's a lot to the French Revolution when it comes to zigs and zags. So indeed, so there we go. And now let us change the camera and enjoy some words to set us on our journey today and tomorrow with the French Revolution. Again, this is a survey class. Eventually, the project will have more elaborate readings. The main core will be over a 1-year cycle, and then the filler, so to speak, and I don't mean that in any fluff sense of the word, but the filling material will be over a 3-year course of reading, allowing for much greater depth of study for those who so choose. Sticking, of course, with a monthly cycle of poetry, month in, month out. All right, so we have our stream camera. Thanks to your donations and goodness to the Institute, we're able to offer this technology. Very helpful. Again, you can get the book on our website, free download there. The Outline of History by H.G. Wells. I have found that putting this on an angle and angling the camera avoids a lot of my headaches heretofore, given the computer stand that I enjoy here. They don't make computer stands like this anymore, I'll tell you that much. The man who made this is long dead, I should think. Lord have mercy on him. But here we go. We're going to dive into our man H.G. Wells. By the way, I know I promised it this week. I will make good on it next week. Next Monday and Tuesday, we're going to get into who H.G. Wells was, and himself as a historian and as an author of larger genres. So we've enjoyed his work for the past few weeks. We're going to get to know our man soon enough. Anyway, towards the French Revolution, the first jar, the first shake to this sense of secure continuity in French life come in 1787. Louis XVI, right, so this is the grandson of Louis XIV, was a dull, ill-educated monarch, and he had the misfortune to be married to a silly, extravagant woman, Marie Antoinette, the sister of the Austrian emperor. The question of her virtue is one of profound interest to a certain type of historical writer, but we need not discuss it here. Virtue in this regard is this very old-fashioned sense of sexual propriety. Unfortunately, Marie Antoinette was the subject of gross calumny in that regard. She lived, as Paul Rewraith put it, side by side, but not at the side of her husband. She was rather heavy-featured, but not so plain as to prevent her posing as a beautiful, romantic, and haughty queen. When the Exchequer, that's the financial accounting office, when the Exchequer was exhausted to be the war with America, remember we talked about that yesterday, the role of the American Revolution on the French Revolution. All of those soldiers come back from America, come back from Yorktown at the end, and their heads are full of this romantic Republican idea of self-government and who made you boss around here and so forth. So that's the American spirit pollinating, and that's very much the case when it comes to liberalism. Is that it must spread. There is something very evangelical to liberalism, and so it is spreading. And we're going to see how that spreads to Haiti and Ireland, and so forth, and how it spreads all over Europe by the mid-19th century in that year of revolutions, 1848. But the war in America, in any case, puts the Exchequer into great debt to support the American rebels, and that money has to be made good. Okay. When the whole country was uneasy with discontents, she, Marie Antoinette, set her influence to thwart the attempts of economy of the king's ministers, to encourage every sort of aristocratic extravagance, and to restore the church and the nobility to the position they had in the great days of Louis the 14th, pardon. Her husband's Louis the 16th. So remember, Louis the 15th just parties a lot, and he chases tail, and it's not. I mean, Louis the 14th did just as much, but he also did other things besides that, which earned his notoriety. Louis the 15th just partied. That's it. And actually, I mean, it is for sitting on your oars for a couple decades as a nation and as a monarchy. Yeah, it could have been worse. I mean, this is the time of Voltaire. This is the time of the Silons. A lot of comedies. We noticed that a lot of comedies, which is interesting. But Marie is dreaming of her father-in-law's days, or rather her grandfather-in-law's days, right, Louis XIV. Non-aristocratic officers were to be weeded from the army, and the power of the church over private life was to be extended. Marie found in upper-class official, in such an official Chiron, her ideal minister of finance. From 1783 to 87, this wonderful man produced money as if by magic. And as if by magic, it disappeared again. Then in 1787, he collapsed. He had piled loan on loan, and now he declared that the monarchy, the grand monarchy that had ruled France since the days of Louis XIV, was bankrupt. Right, so there's a lot of spending to keep up with the noble Joneses going on in Paris. You have the war debt from America, and so you have to finance this. And of course, modern banking is coming into its own. This is, of course, the 18th century, so no one gives a flip about usury. So now you have to account for interest on these loans. No more money could be raised. There must be a gathering of the notables of the kingdom to consider the situation. And so there is, and this is called the Estates General, and this will be called in the summer of 1789, even through the spring, if memory serves. I'm skipping around some. You can follow along on the projects page where we have the proper um, page outline. So you can follow along week by week. It was an assembly, the Estates General, of the representatives of the three orders: the nobles, the clergy, and the third estate, the commons. So the nobles, the clergy, and everyone else. For the third estate, the franchise was very wide, nearly every taxpayer of 25 having a vote. The parish priest voted as clergy, the small nobles as nobles. The States General, or Estates General, or Estates General, was a body without any tradition of procedure. The inquiries were sent to the antiquarians of the Academy of Inscriptions on the matter. So you might recall back in the good old days of Louis XIV, the Sun King, that there had been an event called the Fronde. And the Fronde, Fronde, the Fronde is one of those things you can always see in history where one revolution, a major revolution, will almost inevitably have had a prior outlet. It may be, in the case of the French Revolution, nearly 100 years before the Fronde. In the case of the Russian Revolution, it was, maybe a decade and change before the Revolution of 1905. In the American Revolution, the early 1860s, 1761, 2, and 3 are actually very revolutionary years at the end of the French and Indian War, and yet you don't see the American Revolution pop off until over a decade later. And so you see that again and again. So keep in mind that there was this preliminary thing, and it was suggested at that time that Louis XIV should call the Estates General, and he doesn't do that. He doesn't do that. There is this chance of avoiding, this pent-up energy, and even Louis XIV doesn't do that. Perhaps for the same reason the Soviets, or rather the Chinese communists, the Chinese communists have been very, very reticent to allow democratic reforms in the CCP, no matter how much they might think them a good idea, because they don't want to follow the Soviets, who tried just as much and it got out of control. That's the danger. If you're a ruler and you want to liberalize, you want to call the third estate Louis XIV. I do want that, but if I do, who's to say it won't get out of hand? That's always the danger with these sorts of things, and that's exactly, in fact, what happens when Louis XVI calls this meeting. It is clear that the king and queen meant to treat this fuss about the national finance as a terrible bore and to allow it to interfere with the social routine as little as possible. We find the meetings going on in this spring and summer of 1789 in salons that were not wanted, in orangeries and tennis courts and so forth. The question, right? Okay, so if you're having a meeting on your property and you're holding it in tennis courts and things, it's probably not your priority, right? If you're having it in your side coffee room in your palace, right? This meeting that you're holding for the royal family, it's obviously not the main attraction, and that you're proving that by the locations on your property that you're holding the congresses in. We'll get to the tennis court oath soon enough. The question whether the voting was to be by estate or by head was clearly a vital one. It was wrangled over for 6 weeks. The third estate, taking a leaf from the book of the English House of Commons, then declared that it alone represented the nation, and that no taxation must be levied henceforth without its consent. I've heard that before. The king closed the hall in which it was sitting and intimated that the deputies had better go home. The deputies met in a convenient tennis court and there took the oath of the tennis court, not to separate until they had established a constitution in France. The king took a high line and attempted to disperse the Third Estate by force. The soldiers refused to act, and the king gave in with a dangerous suddenness that accepted the principle that the three estates should all deliberate and vote together as one national assembly. Meanwhile, apparently the Queen's instigation, foreign regiments in the French service, who could be trusted to act against the people, were brought up from the provinces under Marshal de Broglie, and the king prepared to go back upon his concession. So now you see a tension building between this National Assembly, which is smelling blood in the sense that Louis had taken a step back and given into their demands. And now you can see troops being positioned around Paris and around Versailles to snuff them out, potentially. Now, a word is in order concerning Marie Antoinette. She was Austrian, and that is something that never stood her well. She was always portrayed by enemies of the monarchy as a foreigner. I believe her nickname was Le Austerliche, the Austrian bitch. And the poor woman never had a moment's peace when it came to the French press. And indeed, outright pornographic depictions of herself were floated in the newspapers, which we must recall were basically the internet of the 18th century. The Revolt of July 14th, 1789, was really the effective French Revolution. The grim-looking prison of the Bastille, this big tower in Paris, very feebly defended, was stormed by the people of Paris, and the insurrection spread rapidly throughout France. In the east and northwest provinces, many châteaux, these are palaces, they're like McMansions. They're the French 18th century version of McMansions, of which we have no shortage in Connecticut. Chateaux belonged to the nobility were burnt by the peasants, and their title deeds carefully destroyed. So now you have burnings happening in the countryside. We needn't pussyfoot around this. There is, of course, an aspect of secret societies, just like with the American Revolution, when it comes to the French Revolution. And we are certainly within our bounds to assert that they had a hand in the burning of the chateau and coordinating that throughout France, almost like an 18th century Black Lives Matter. These mobs don't come out of nowhere. The insurrection spread throughout France. In a month, the ancient and decayed system of the aristocratic order had collapsed. Many of the leading princes and courtiers of the Queen's party had fled abroad. These are called the émigrés. These are the émigrés. So if you have money and you're a French noble, at this point, you are getting out of Dodge. The National Assembly found itself called upon to create new political and social systems for a new age. They will also develop new military systems, including the National Guard. The National Guard. Now, we have something like that in America. Of course, there's no relationship. The American National Guard is something Woodrow Wilson came up with when he stole the militias from the state governments in 1913, a very interesting year. The French National Guard, however, is something much older. And you have to keep in mind when it comes to this new National Assembly military force, the National Guard, that every Frenchman is liable. And we're going to see how that really influences the course of modern warfare, particularly at the Battle of Valmy in, I believe, 1792 or 1793. We'll get there. The French National Assembly was far less fortunate in the circumstances of its task than the American Congress. The latter had half a continent to itself, with no possible antagonist but the British government. Its religious and educational organizations were various, collectively, but not very powerful, and on the whole friendly. King George was far away in England, and sinking slowly towards an imbecile condition. Nevertheless, it took the United States several years to hammer out a working constitution. The French, on the other hand, were surrounded by aggressive neighbors and Machiavellian ideas, and they were encumbered by a king and a court resolved to make mischief. The church was one single great organization, inextricably bound up with the ancient order. So in America, the churches, so-called, are all divided, and because of their organization, because of the congregational way, so to speak, rather sympathetic to a Republican government. Whereas in France, you have the monarchical Catholic Church, obviously is going to ally with the monarchy. Now, that's going to cause a lot of headaches for the Catholic Church when there are no more monarchies to ally with, but that is another story for another day. So we move ahead here, and there is a long explanation from Carlyle about the administration of the National Assembly. Here's a mention from Carlyle of that National Guard. Let's take a looky here. I'll consider this vanguard of national troops with trains of artillery of pikemen and pikewomen, mounted on cannons, on carts, hackney coaches, or on foot. Loaves stuck on the points of bayonets, green boughs stuck in gun barrels. Next, as main march, 50 cartloads of corn have been lent for peace from the stores of Versailles, behind which follow stragglers of the Garde des Corps, all humiliated. This is the French monarchical unit, in grenadier bonnets. Close on these comes the royal carriage. Some royal carriages, for there are hundreds of national deputies too, among whom sits Mirabeau. His remarks not given. Finally, then pell-mell, the rear guard, Flandres, Swiss, 100 Swiss, other bodyguards, brigands, whoever cannot get before. Between and among all which masses flows without limit Saint Antoine and the Menadic cohort. This was October 6th, 1789. For nearly 2 years, the royal family went unmolested in the Tuileries. Had the court kept common faith with the people, the king might have died there, and he might have died a king. Then follows the flight to Valmy, where Axel von Fersing, who was a veteran of the American War of Independence and a childhood friend of Marie Antoinette, Axel von Fersing, who actually encamped and fought here in Connecticut. He encamped on George Washington Road, appropriately called, down in Ridgefield. I've passed there many, many times driving to work in a former situation. Axel von Fersing warns Marie Antoinette, who's being held with her family in the Tuileries, no, you have to get out. I was in the National Assembly today, and they were talking about killing the king. You and your family have to leave. It is no longer safe for you to stay in Paris. And so the family flees. And they flee. This is indeed called the flight to Valmy. And they are apprehended at the border and sent back to Paris. And in the second return, it is not nearly as gay and as jubilant as it was the first time. And that was June 1791, the flight to Valmy. Between 11 o'clock and midnight, the king and queen and their children slipped out of the Tuileries disguise, threatened their palpitating way threaded through Paris, circled round from the north of the city and to the east, and got at last into a traveling carriage that was waiting upon the road to Chalon. They were flying to the army of the East. The army of the East was loyal. That is to say, its generals and officers at least were prepared to betray France to the king and court. Very interesting. Obviously, you can see where H.G. Wells's sympathies lie, right? Because you do have the creation now of France as being different than the royal family. That's a major thing you notice between 1789 and now the return of the royal family in 1781 is that the concept of the nation of France is severed from the royal monarchy. How different it was compared to Louis XIV from a couple weeks ago. Louis XIV, who said, "I am the state, I am France, I am the incarnation," almost in the sense of a Roman emperor. Um, being the sacrament of Rome, being the external side of the invisible unity of Rome. And there's something very, very similar going on with the absolute monarchs. There's a difference. You see it even in the grammar. The army loyal to the royal family will betray France to the king and the court, which is implying that France is somehow a different entity than the king and the court. Here was an adventure at last after the Queen's heart, and one can understand the pleasurable excitement of the little party as the miles lengthened between themselves and Paris. Away over the hills were reverence, deep bows, and the kissing of hands. Then back to Versailles, right? And then we'll show those revolutionary pups who's boss. A little shooting of the mob in Paris, artillery if need be, a few executions, but not the sort of people who matter. A white terror for a few months, and all would be well again. Perhaps Colomb might return too with fresh financial expedients. All such bright anticipation was cruelly dashed that night at Varney. The king had been recognized at the San Menhol by the landlord of the post house, and as the night fell, the eastward roads clattered with galloping messengers rousing the country. Paul Revere, a French Paul Revere, trying to intercept the fugitives. There were fresh hopes waiting in the upper village of Varney. The young officer in charge had given the king up for the night and gone to bed, while, for half an hour, the lower village, the poor king, disguised as a valet, disputed with his postilions, who had expected relief in the lower village and refused to go farther. So this marks a turning point in the French Revolution. In fact, there's a convenient map here. You can see, there we go. All right, so here is Paris. Here is Paris. And they, in disguise, make it all the way to the border of here, the Austrian Netherlands. Remember, Marie Antoinette's mother is Maria Theresa, the head of Austria, absolute monarch in her own right. Coming up to Verdun, Metz, or this is still France. This is the Meuse River. All right, so they're almost there. They're almost in those Austrian Netherlands, but they're apprehended at Varney. And this will usher in the reign of terror and the Jacobins. He calls this, H.G. Wells will call this, let's see here, something like the Jacobin ascendancy. Let's see. The Jacobin Republic, the revolution of the Jacobins. So they are the fanatics. These, and we'll talk more about them tomorrow, but these Jacobins were the equivalent of American radicals, men with untrammeled, advanced ideas. Their strength lay in the fact that they were unencumbered and downright. They were poor men with nothing to lose. The party of moderation, of compromise with the relics of the old order was led. These such men of established position, as General Lafayette, another Connecticut veteran, another American Revolution veteran, who had distinguished himself, indeed, as a young man by fighting for the American colonies as a volunteer, and Mirabeau, an aristocrat who was ready to model himself on the rich and influential aristocrat of England. But Robespierre, much more to say about him, was a needy but clever young lawyer from Arras, whose most precious possession was his faith in Rousseau. Danton was scarcely more wealthy barrister in Paris. a big gesticulating rhetorical figure, sometimes played by Gerard Depardieu. Marat, who, Gerard Depardieu, who has done some very strange acting roles, including one involving a Sawzall. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Marat was an older man, a Swiss of some scientific distinction, but equally unembarrassed by possessions. He had spent several years in England. He was an honorary MD of St. Andrews and had published some valuable contributions to medical science in English. Both Benjamin Franklin and Goethe were interested in his works in physics. This man was called by Carlyle, this English historian of the French Revolution, a rabid dog, atrocious, squalid, and dogleech, this last by way of tribute to his science. So we see after the flight to Varney, we see that the French Revolution enters a new stage. We go from this moderate revolution where you want a constitutional monarchy, you want a parliament in the manner of England, you want maybe a bit more secularism given the role of the Catholic Church in France. Well, you don't want to kill the priests, you don't want to kill the nobles. We don't yet, even in 1791. By 1793, we certainly will. By 1793, with the help of the Jacobins and other radical factions, we'll have sayings like, "You will strangle the last king with the guts of the last priest." So that obviously represents a radicalization. And we had said that, in fact, war will do that. We looked at the American Revolution in that regard yesterday. War will radicalize people, and they will radicalize positions. I don't care if it's the Syrian civil war right now, lately concluded. I don't care if it's the American Revolution. I don't care if it's the Punic War. Wars radicalize people, and we see exactly that happening now in 1791, 1792 in France. So we're going to pick up with that, the Jacobin Revolution, for tomorrow. And we'll bring everything to the feet of Napoleon as we conclude our week, looking at H.G. Wells's outline of history. And as I say, next Monday and Tuesday, we're going to take a look at our author. We'll take a break from the text a little bit and get into our author and what he was doing with this outline of history. And we can also elaborate next week on what we will be doing with this outline of history in our unified curricula here at the college, as we're organizing a monthly cycle of poetry to be complemented by a one-year reading of the outline of history and a 3-year reading of the Durand Story of Civilization and Appropriate Literature, unifying both our enrolled students, our alumni, the general public, and our larger supporters. That's a grand idea. And if you want to be part of that bandwagon and hop on the project bandwagon, you can freely download all the text that we've been going through in these morning sessions from our website, which you can see down below in the description. For now, thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for your material support and donations to Apocatastasis. And I will catch you tomorrow as we continue through this marvelous study of history. Alete.